Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Pakistan has called on the international community to urge India to lift its inhuman military siege in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. At a press briefing, the Foreign Office spokesperson said extrajudicial killings and staged search operations by the Indian forces continue with impunity. Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said Pakistan will continue to stand with Kashmiris in their just struggle till the realization of their right to self-determination. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Vienna talks to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal cannot go on indefinitely. Speaking to reporters in Kuwait, Blinken said the ball is in Iran's court and that Washington will see if Tehran is ready to come back into compliance. Indirect talks between Tehran and Washington to revive the pact adjourned in June, and it remains unclear when they might resume. At least 60 people have died after a flash flood swept down a valley in Taliban-controlled Kamdesh district in Nuristan province of Afghanistan. The Ministry of Disaster Management said around 100 people are missing, while dozens of houses have been destroyed. Taliban said they are helping villagers look for missing people and announced to allow humanitarian agencies safe access to the area. The U.S. has delivered 3 million doses of the Moderna coronavirus vaccine to Pakistan under the UN-led COVAX initiative. Pakistan is witnessing a sharp rise in daily infections and deaths as authorities decide to ban malls and air travel for those unvaccinated. Meanwhile, India's southern state of Kerala has announced a 2-day lockdown to stem the spread of infections. Globally, there are now more than 4.1 million deaths and more than 195 million infections. On day 6 of the Tokyo Olympics, Japan leads the medal standings with 15 golds after winning 2 medals in judo events. Team China follows the host country with 14 golds as its Zhang Yufei won the women's 200-meter butterfly, breaking the Olympic record, while the US lead the overall medals tally with 37 and China trail with 29. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Pakistan has called on the international community to urge India to lift its inhuman military siege in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. At a press briefing, the Foreign Office spokesperson said extrajudicial killings and staged search operations by the Indian forces continue with impunity. Zahid Hafiz Chaudhry said 5th of August would mark the completion of an unprecedented 24-months-long military siege. He highlighted that Kashmiri leadership also remains incarcerated under trumped-up charges. The spokesperson said the Indian government is turning the Kashmiris into a minority through illegal changes in the demographic structure of the valley. He added that Pakistan will continue to stand with Kashmiris in their just struggle till the realization of their right to self-determination. Pakistan says it cannot be held responsible for the actions of the Taliban following the withdrawal of the US and its allies. Talking to the Afghan media, Prime Minister Imran Khan said his government is not a spokesperson for the Taliban. Prime Minister Imran Khan reiterated that Pakistan wants peace in Afghanistan. He said it's up to the Afghans to choose between a US-backed military solution or a political settlement. The Prime Minister stressed that Pakistan cannot monitor the movement of 3 million Afghan refugees. He said, however, Pakistan is trying its best and has completed 90% of the border fencing between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Khan stressed that Afghanistan cannot be controlled from the outside and Pakistan has no favorites there. The Taliban claimed to have killed an Afghan army colonel in an attack in Kabul's Bagrami district. In a tweet, the group spokesperson said they targeted Colonel Asif in the Golebati area. The spokesperson said the group also killed 9 Afghan security personnel in Nangarhar. He said the Taliban destroyed a military checkpoint in the Khogiani district of the province. Meanwhile, the Afghan army says it has killed 37 fighters, including 2 senior commanders. It said 35 Taliban have also been injured in an airstrike along the Jozjan-Sadepul highway. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi says Islamabad wants to enhance economic ties with the Kingdom of Bahrain. He was talking to Bahrain's Crown Prince, Deputy Supreme Commander, and Prime Minister Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa in Manama. Qureshi, who is on a 2-day official visit to the country, said Pakistan is focused on economic development as per Prime Minister Imran Khan's vision. During the meeting, both sides also discussed affairs pertaining to welfare of the Pakistani community in Bahrain. The prince appreciated Pakistani community's positive role in the progress of Bahrain. He also commended Pakistan's cooperation in enhancing Bahrain's defense capability. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Vienna talks to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal cannot go on indefinitely. Speaking to reporters in Kuwait, Blinken said the ball is in Iran's court and that Washington will see if Tehran is ready to come back into compliance. Indirect talks between Tehran and Washington to revive the pact adjourned in June, 2 days after Ibrahim Raisi won Iran's presidential elections. Parties involved in the negotiations have yet to say when they might resume. The nuclear deal was torpedoed in 2018 by the then U.S. President Donald Trump, who unilaterally withdrew from the agreement and imposed sanctions on Iran. The U.S. has announced sanctions on Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government for human rights violations. It also targeted 8 prisons run by al-Assad's intelligence apparatus and 5 senior officials who oversee them.
The Treasury Department said the Assad regime has tortured at least 14,000 prisoners to death. In a statement, it said more than 130,000 people reportedly remain missing or arbitrarily detained. The Treasury also imposed sanctions on the Syrian armed group Ihrar al-Sharqiya for abuses against civilians. In a separate statement, the Treasury announced curbs on a Turkey-based al-Qaeda financial facilitator. The department said it also targeted one Syria-based terrorist fundraiser and recruiter. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said the curbs showed the U.S. commitment to human rights and accountability for abuse against Syrians.
And for more on this, we are joined by Dr. Arnaud Develay, a political analyst from Damascus. Mr. Develay, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. First of all, the U.S. has sanctioned the Syrian officials, saying the curbs will promote accountability for abuses committed against the Syrian people. So what's your take on this?
Well, one has to keep in mind that there's been a systematic campaign to demonize the Syrian and legitimate Syrian government for years now. The so-called Caesar file, which actually paved the way for the passing of this U.S. law, domestic U.S. law, I should add, allowing for sanctions against any countries who might engage in some kind of transaction with the Syrian government, and so on a matter of humanitarian ground as well, has always been debunked as an operation led by the humanitarian NGO complex, i.e., in this case, Amnesty International. This is something that is savantly organized by the neoconservative and liberal interventionist crowd in Washington, and they've been at it, using media, NGO complex, and by manipulating as well the United Nations agencies, such as the Organization for the Control of Chemical Weapons. So this is nothing new. And in this instance, it's just yet another example of this attrition war, hybrid warfare that is being waged, not as much on the Syrian government and or Syrian officials, but against the Syrian people.
So, Dr. Devlin, what does Washington want to gain with the latest curbs, as it has already sanctioned the Syrian government?
Yes. Well, the objective is always stated as such, basically that by putting pressure on the Syrian officials and Syrian organs of the state, they are trying to basically prevent the state, the Syrian state, from attending to its citizens' needs. And the hope is that over the long run, public opinion in Syria, but also in other countries where those sanction regimes are being imposed, the population will turn against their elected officials. And I want to remind our viewers that we've had a presidential election a couple of months ago, which was a ringing endorsement by the Syrian people of the way President Bashar al-Assad has handled and presided over the waging of the war of liberation from terrorism. So those attempts to try to drive a wedge between Syrian people, regular people, and its leadership will fail ultimately. So in the end, as former UK ambassador to Syria, Peter Ford, said, we are really witnessing nothing more than a spiteful policy which aims at cruelly rendering ordinary Syrians' lives miserable and nothing else.
Okay, Dr. Devlin, the Biden administration is pulling all American troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq. But the U.S. military operation in Syria has seen no changes at all. Why do you think the U.S. wants to linger on with its presence in Syria?
As for your question on Syria, the Syria group that has been specially appointed upon President Biden's inauguration have openly claimed that their role is to basically remain in Syria for the oil as a means of pressure to prevent any kind of reconstruction and to put pressure on Syrian government to basically obtain through economic sanction what they could not obtain through the means of terrorism. So Syria has won the war militarily, and now comes a new chapter. It's a new chapter which bears on economic sanctions, on diplomatic pressure, and basically on trying to prevent any reconstruction to take place. But by no means the situation is that different between Syria and Iraq, or between Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. I would say that specifically to Syria and Iraq, the main things for the Americans is to try to contain what they call Iranian influence. They believe that, and in order to protect their, proxy state, the Israeli state, in the region, they need to maintain a presence in the region to prevent what they perceive as Iranian influence filling the vacuum if they were to leave. So there's no way the Americans are going to be leaving the regions anytime soon. If anything, they are reactivating, as we speak, terrorist cells. They are trying to break the lack of porosity of the border between Iraq and Syria, which has early on in the last decade, allowed them to wreak havoc, essentially by facilitating the ins and outs of terrorists under their care and training and control, should I say.
Dr. Arnaud Devlin, thank you very much for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. Now moving on, Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has proposed permanent deployment of Russian troops along the border with Azerbaijan amid rising tensions. This comes as Baku said Armenian forces have violated the ceasefire deal and launched attacks in the Kalbajar region. The Azeri Defense Ministry said Armenian forces fired rifles and hand grenades at positions in Zaylek village. In a statement, Baku says its armed forces retaliated and suppressed the shelling. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department has condemned the recent clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan. State Department spokesperson Ned Price urged the countries to uphold their ceasefire commitments. The Arab coalition says it has destroyed missiles and drones launched by the Houthi rebels towards Saudi Arabia. The coalition said Yemeni rebels launched 2 ballistic missiles and 1 explosive-laden drone towards Jazan city. The coalition said it is taking operational measures to protect civilians from terrorist attacks. The development comes just a day after the coalition intercepted 4 Houthi missiles and 2 drones. Meanwhile, U.S. envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, met with his UN counterpart, Mu'in Sharim. Lenderking voiced concern about Houthis' Marib offensive in Yemen. In a tweet, Washington said both underscored the need for a nationwide ceasefire and renewed political talks. Israeli forces have detained 11 Palestinians, including a minor, from various parts of the West Bank. This comes just a day after the Israeli army killed a 12-year-old Palestinian boy in the Beit Omer town in Hebron city. The Palestinian Health Ministry said Mohammed al-Alami was shot in the chest while traveling in a car with his father. Al-Alami is the 3rd young Palestinian to die of wounds sustained by Israeli fire in days. Earlier, the Israeli military injured at least 100 people in a clampdown on a protest against the killing of a 49-year-old Palestinian. Palestinian media said the occupying forces fired live bullets, rubber-coated steel bullets, as well as tear gas. China says provocative U.S. actions in the South China Sea are disturbing the peace and stability of the region. This comes after U.S. Navy destroyer Benfold sailed through Taiwan Straits on Wednesday. The Chinese People's Liberation Army said it tracked and monitored the movements of the U.S. warship. The spokesperson, Shi Ye, said the Eastern Theater Command is ready to respond to any sort of threat. Earlier, China's new ambassador to the U.S. said the bilateral ties are at a critical juncture. Qin urged against shutting down the door to better ties between the two states. Russia says it is concerned over what it called the activity of the U.S. Special Services on its territory. A Kremlin spokesperson says it has been evident for a long time and is still ongoing. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov reiterated that Moscow is not interfering in the electoral process in America or any other country. Peskov said numerous investigations in the U.S. confirmed that Russia never interfered in polls. He was responding to President Joe Biden's statement that Russia is trying to meddle in the upcoming midterm U.S. elections. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned.
I have been suffering from arthritis for 4 years now. At the age of 14, her eyesight started getting weak. They send me monthly household expenses, rations, and electricity bills. Many thanks to the people of Beria Town. Thanks to their entire team. Thanks to Malik Riaz. They supported us more than our own relatives. The way they bless people, they did not just make this world, but the one hereafter.
Bahria Town has also taken the responsibility of sponsoring the needy people. This love for the people is the ideology of Bahria Town, and this passion keeps us continuing the service of humanity. Bahria Town, building a new tomorrow.
Welcome back. Brazil has reported more than 1,300 COVID-19 deaths for the second day in a row. The Latin American country also logged more than 48,000 new cases in the past 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 4.1 million lives and infected over 195 million people. More in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic continues to inflict a devastating toll. As the Delta variant sweeps through the world, the Pan American Health Organization said Argentina, Colombia, Cuba, Ecuador, and Paraguay have some of the world's highest weekly death rates. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with World Health Organization's chief and reiterated support for the probe into the origins of the virus. In New York, authorities say starting from Labor Day, vaccination will be mandatory for state employees.
So in New York and our state hospitals, all patient-facing healthcare workers must get vaccinated. There will be no testing option for patient-facing healthcare workers. That is a point of contact that could be a serious spreading event. And we want to make sure that those healthcare workers are vaccinated.
Protesters placed body bags outside Facebook's headquarters to call it out for allowing the spread of misinformation about the vaccines. Meanwhile, in the Turkish city of Diyarbakir, authorities beg citizens to get vaccinated as the new wave in the east keeps surging. Over in the United Kingdom, opposition parties say opening borders for the United States and Europe without quarantine can import new COVID variants. France says that it will implement the use of passes to access public places by the 9th of August if the Constitutional Council approves the contested bill.
The
Constitutional Council has stated that it will issue its decision on the Health Pass bill on August 5th. The law will then be enacted afterwards, and we plan to have it take effect on August 9th. It's on this date that the extension of the Health Pass would take effect, and let me remind you, there will be a period of adjustment and tolerance of education and help for those concerned.
Cuba says Iran is set to start producing the island's homegrown COVID-19 vaccines on an industrial scale. The Yemeni government has put health facilities and workers on high alert as the country braces for a third wave. A new study, not yet peer-reviewed, shows that the efficacy of Pfizer's vaccine fell from 96% to 84% over 6 months. Meanwhile, Tokyo Olympics organizers have reported 24 new cases among participants, including 3 athletes.
In Pakistan, COVID-19 has claimed 76 lives overnight, the country's highest number since June the 10th. The health ministry says the death toll has reached 23,209. The ministry has registered nearly 4,500 infections in the past 24 hours. The caseload has exceeded 1,020,000. Meanwhile, more than 937,000 people have recovered. The ministry says there are over 59,000 active cases, of which more than 3,000 are critical. Meanwhile, over 27.8 million vaccine doses have been administered so far across the country. In India, rape victim blaming by a ruling BJP leader has sparked outrage over social media and among human rights activists. 2 girls were gang raped on Benolim Beach, south of Goa's capital, on Sunday. Chief Minister of Goa State, Pramod Sawant, asked parents to be more responsible. Speaking in the parliament, he said parents need to introspect on why their children were on the beach late at night. Sawant said the responsibility cannot be put on the government and police. Moving on, at least 60 people have died after flash floods swept down a valley in Taliban-controlled Kamdesh district in Nuristan province of Afghanistan. The Ministry of Disaster Management said around 200 people are missing, while dozens of houses have been destroyed. Officials said that the death toll can increase as rescuers gain more access to the affected areas. The Taliban said they are helping villagers look for missing people and announced to allow humanitarian agencies safe access to the area. Flooding has become a routine summer tragedy in northern and eastern Afghanistan, where infrastructure is poor. Bangladesh has evacuated 10,000 Rohingya from refugee camps on the Myanmar border. Officials said they took the step after monsoon landslides and flash floods killed at least 14 people. Officials said the refugees were relocated from hilly slopes around the Balu Khali camp in Cox's Bazar. About 7,000 local people outside the camps have also been moved to safety. Over 850,000 Rohingya refugees are packed into 34 camps in Cox's Bazar. The area has received over 27 centimeters of rain since Monday. The UN Refugee Agency said 2,500 shelters housing 12,000 Rohingya have been affected by the floods. Bangladesh's Met Department has predicted more torrential rains. Three persons have died in a forest fire that is burning for a second day in southern Turkey. Hot weather and strong winds have helped the fire spread around the town of Manavgat and nearby villages in Antalya. Agriculture Minister Bakir Pakdemirli said authorities have evacuated 18 villages and districts in Antalya province, while 16 villages in the neighboring Adana and Mersin have also been evacuated. The country's efforts to bring 10 ongoing fires under control are continuing. More than 1,800 personnel, 3 planes and 29 helicopters are deployed to fight the blazes. Turkish prosecutors also launched an investigation to determine the cause of the fire. In Lebanon, a volunteer firefighter has died in a blaze that broke out in northern Akkad Governorate's Kobiyat area. In a tweet, Lebanese Red Crescent said it is transporting a number of injured to the hospitals. The humanitarian movement said it has also been evacuating vulnerable communities. Raging wildfires have burned large swathes of pine forests in the mountainous north. Local authorities said the high wind speed is preventing the flames from being extinguished. An 8.2 magnitude earthquake that struck the coast of Alaska triggered a tsunami watch in Hawaii. These threats were later revised down after the U.S. tsunami warning system deemed they had passed. The U.S. Geological Survey said the quake struck at a depth of 46.7 kilometers. 2 other earthquakes with preliminary magnitudes of 6.2 and 5.6 occurred in the same area within half an hour. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center says the potential threat to Guam and American Samoa is still under investigation. Paraguay has seized more than 3,400 kilos of cocaine near the capital city of Asunción. Police have called it the country's biggest ever drug bust. Officials say the cocaine was being stashed in a load of sugar for international shipment. National Police Commander Luis Arias told reporters that illegal stimulant was found in a warehouse. The bust exceeded the previous record in the country, where 2,900 kgs of cocaine was seized in October 2020. That cargo had been hidden in the bags of charcoal. In Brazil, a cold wave in the southern state of Rio Grande do Sul has brought snow and cold rains to at least 13 cities. There were snowfalls in cities including São Francisco de Paula, Gramado, Carlos Barbosa, and Bege. The unusual weather phenomenon is related to a large polar air mass that entered during the last few hours. Tourists and locals use the opportunity to take pictures and play in São Francisco de Paula. The temperature there is expected to reach 2 degrees centigrade. Another business updates. European stocks have inched higher as investors digested a fresh round of major corporate earnings. They are also inspecting the impact of the US Federal Reserve's reiteration of its dovish policy stance. London's FTSE has gained the most so far, inching close to 1%. Frankfurt's DAX and the Pan-European Stock 600 have edged up marginally. The CAC 40 in Paris and Italy's FTSE MIB have added over 0.5%. Earlier, Asian stocks rose, with Hong Kong's Hang Seng jumping over 3%, while mainland Chinese stocks added nearly 1.5%. And now for weather updates, we have Naila Shuja with us.
Thank you. We're going to start off with Abu Dhabi, where the weather is expected to be extremely hot, with temperatures rising to 43 degrees Celsius. While in Amsterdam, the weather is partially cloudy and anticipated temperatures are at 19 degrees Celsius. If we head to Ankara, the weather is sunny with temperatures at around 33 degrees Celsius. Moving down under to Auckland, the temperature is chilly at 16 degrees Celsius with some clouds overhead. Now, if you are traveling to Bangkok, there will be cloudy weather with temperatures around 32 degrees Celsius. In Beijing, clouds are veiling the sun with temperatures at 27 degrees Celsius, while Beirut will be experiencing some sunny weather with temperatures at 32 degrees Celsius. Berliners will be experiencing temperatures at 23 degrees Celsius with some clouds making the weather more pleasant. Now heading to Cairo, the sun will be out with temperatures around 38 degrees Celsius. Down under in Canberra, the temperatures are at 13 degrees Celsius with the sun overhead. In Islamabad, temperatures are at 31 degrees Celsius, accompanied by some thunderstorms, while in Jakarta, the temperatures are steady at 33 degrees Celsius with partial sun in the forecast. That's all for now. Back to you.
Thank you, Naila, for the weather updates. And that is all for now for the latest updates. You can follow us on social media at Indus News.